Hello and welcome to another episode of Gotham Sound TV. I am here live with Karl Winkler of Lectrosonics. Hi, Karl.
Hello, Peter. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me out here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We're here to talk about the B1C1 band. This is especially of interest, worldwide, but we're talking about it specifically as it pertains to the U.S. market and U.S. FCC regulations.
Yeah, it's a topic, near to my heart because when we lost the 600 band in those auctions and we lost access to it in 2018, there was a couple little pieces of that spectrum left, but the rules were very stringent for it. And, I think most people have the idea that, quote unquote 600 meg band is off limits. And there are some savvy users out there that have hung on to certain pieces of equipment in let's say block 25 and use a few things there. But we can talk about that as well. But, I was telling you, Peter, the anecdote about the last couple times we posted on Instagram about the DSSM, the watertight transmitter, somebody came on and commented, "I don't care about water tightness. I want to know what you're doing for the spectrum." And of course, we've always done a lot of things for spectrum, but this specifically gives you a nice chunk of access to spectrum that, we didn't offer before for the U.S. market. So that's what we're here to talk about, is what the rules are, what the spectrum is, maybe the workflow of how you would plan for it, and what the equipment is that gets you access to that. So that's what I'm here to talk about.
I'm really grateful. And I'd say when you emailed and said, we want to talk about B1C1, I felt a little ignorant about it. I was like, well, we don't really sell that much. Why, in this market? I'm excited for you to share the knowledge about it.
Great. Well, I put together a few slides to kind of illustrate what the spectrum is that we're talking about. So if I can share those now. Okay, so the traditional U.S. band since 2018 has been the A1B1 band, covering 470 to 608 megahertz, because right above 608 is TV37, and that's off limits, except for industrial. It's for medical and radio astronomy, so they keep that clean. Then there was a little tiny bit left over in the 614 meg range, but it was literally like 200 kilohertz. So that got a little bit left out. So what B1C1 represents is starting at 537 or block 21 and going up to into 663 megahertz for the U.S. market. We've been making B1C1 stuff for Europe because they never lost their 600 meg band, but we haven't done it for the U.S. until now. So this is the overall band that it covers, is blocks 21 through part of 25, most of 25. And to give you a little bit more detail, these are the chunks there. So 614 to 616, you get 2 megahertz. And then up in the duplex gap from 653 to 663. So in total, you still got the B1 band, or about 71 megahertz. And then you've got that 2 megahertz bit, and then the 10 megahertz between 653 and 663. The restrictions are that it's a max of 20 milliwatts. In the old days, 20 milliwatts would seem like a tiny amount of power, and Lectro always had 100 milliwatts, and or you could always select 50. But in today's world of digital, when everything's high power is considered to be 50 milliwatts in the digital realm, 20 is a good amount. But I like to remind everyone that it's really more about the signal to noise always, rather than just the pure power. So if you've got a really clean piece of spectrum, like in the middle of that duplex gap, 20 milliwatts is quite a bit. So you should be able to get usable range, maybe not for an uncontrolled type situation where you go between cars, outdoors, but for a lot of indoor work, and particularly in a soundstage or a theater or a studio, that's plenty of power. So that's the limitation is 20 milliwatts, but you get access to spectrum that we didn't have before.
While we're talking about limitations, Tristan W. asks the question, have the regulations changed in Canada for the C1 band? or is it identical to the FCC regulations? How does that work for Canada?
It's the same.
Okay, good.
So it does work for Canada. Yeah, this is designed for North America, really, not just the United States.
That's excellent news. And my follow-up question is, do these regulations differ if an end user has a Part 74 FCC license?
No, they don't.
Okay. So that's
a good question, though.
These are the same for everybody, these regulations.
They're the same, and part of the reason for that is because for these to be licensable as to use them in the unlicensed band, notice that the light blue areas here says unlicensed mic and white space devices. To be able to be licensed there, it has to meet this 20 milliwatt max, which is the top no matter whether you're licensed or not. But we have basically the license for both. It's compatible with both. And that's still the limit, though, either way.
Great. By the way, just to be clear, this C1 band that we're talking about in this block is on top of the 71 megs that's available in B1.
Yes.
All within the same unit.
Exactly. Same unit goes all the way from the bottom of B1 up to 663, which is not all the way to the top of C1, but we don't have access to anything above 663. So it's a total of, what does that make it? 83 meg that you have access to in this B1 C1 band.
Perfect.
And the other point that you're maybe alluding to is the fact that these units using B1 C1 are compatible with A1 B1 in the B1 band. So there's that whole overlap of the B1 band, about 75 meg, that the units are cross compatible.
Perfect.
So the next question, I guess, is why would we look at this? What's important about this? And I've long argued that band planning is super important, and that it's a very good idea to segregate your IFBs, your comms, your IEMs, your anything that's not your primary talent channels. And in some ways, that used to be easier. I mean, block-specific wireless was kind of a pain in the butt in some ways, but it really gave you that, hey, I'm going to put my talent in blocks 21, 22, and my IFBs in 23, that kind of thing.
I have a super nerdy maxim. With wide bandwidth comes wide responsibility.
Perfect.
So I think band planning is definitely part of this.
Yes, it's really the center of this discussion from my point of view, because everything now overlaps. If you've got let's say an A1 SRC based system and then an LT on B1 for your IFB transmitter, receivers in block 23, that sort of thing. And then you got a DSR4 and a DCHT for your camera hop or your digital stereo in-ears or whatever. All these things are overlapping, and it's very easy to step on yourself when doing this. So, I've long advocated, obviously, giving things enough space, and wideband tuning does give you that, but particularly between your hop and IFB transmitters, giving an easement, between those and your talent transmitters for best performance. But things start to get a little crowded when you're talking about getting into higher channel counts and all the other things that you want coming in and out of the bag.
Without proper band planning, not only do things get crowded, but you're stepping on your own foot. In terms
That's
of
right.
It's the equivalent of shining a giant light down the barrel of a lens if you're trying to photograph a candle, for example.
No, it's a great example. And so even if you're not directly on frequency, having a strong signal that's just out of band may still desensitize your sensitive talent receivers. And that's an issue I think a lot of people face. They're saying, hey, what happened to my range? Like, well, what's in your bag? Well, I've got a T4. Well, it's a 250 milliwatt transmitter right physically next to your very sensitive receivers. And things like digital transmission, being so close in. So we've long advocated this, but now with devices available in the VHF band, the 941 band, and things like that, you can start moving things around. So one example of carving out a little more space for your stuff might be to move your labs 4 and 5 in this scenario from an SRC A1 to an SRC 941. And there's tons of room. That's like an octave separation. It's a wonderful thing. Or an alternate might be, and this is what I would probably do, is move your IFBs out of that B1 band and put them into the 941 band. So this way now I've got all my talent in the A1, B1 range and my IFB in the 941 range. But you've still got that DCHT for your hop or your digital. Let's say you're using the duet system for your boom op, that sort of thing. That's still an issue, and you got to find a home for it. So that's kind of the main thrust of where B1C1 comes in, is that you can move that out of that B1 range and up into the C1 range in that duplex gap. So now I've got way more room for my 5 talent mics, and I've got my IFB and my hop moved out of that band with a good amount of separation, more than you could do otherwise.
Yes.
So that's really the main thrust here.
That's great. I mean, I want to give special shout out to IFBs in 941. That's a particularly favorite trick that I use. Yeah, I mean, I think you can put your hops in this duplex gap because your hops tend to have a fewer lower channel count, and so you can really take advantage even of that 2 megahertz band. But we were also talking about some interesting tricks that you could do with high density mode in even the narrow sliver of 2 megahertz.
Absolutely. And I do want to mention that oftentimes hops don't need to be very high power either, and that kind of leads to that. But I want to reiterate a couple things. First off, here's some of the receivers that are available today in the B1C1 band. And by the way, receivers cover the whole band because there's no restriction on having a receiver that tunes all the way to 691. But it's the transmitters that are now legal. We're starting to have some models legal for the US, and they do have a cutoff above 663. But don't forget that with these receiver models, you can tune any channel to any frequency within the band. So, for instance, in the B1C1 band, you could have something in that B1 range at the bottom of B1 and something in the duplex gap in the same unit. So that's the DSR4, DSR, and 822. And we mentioned this before, the kind of backwards compatibility, the overlap in the B1 range.
Mm-hmm.
So to your question, though, HDM mode, where does this play in? Because that's part of our digital transmitters, is this low power, 2 milliwatt, extremely narrow carrier. And we found we could get 24 of these things plus into 6 megahertz. We actually got as many as 40, although I would say that's pushing the envelope a little bit. But it's comfortable margin. You go, wow, with only 2 megahertz between 614 and 616, what could I do with that? Well, you could fit quite a bit of channels in, considering that it's a very clean piece of spectrum. So again, 2 milliwatts, perfect for a hop or an IFB feed, a digital IFB feed, or maybe even some talent mics. So that's HDM mode. And I think the concern about the 2 milliwatts goes away when you actually start playing with it, particularly when you get it into a clean piece of spectrum, as several of our mutual acquaintances have been doing on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, I had to prove it to myself. There was a PSA commercial that I worked on, and it was in a studio, and battery life was a concern, and so I just put everything into 2 milliwatts just to test it out, and range was not an issue. It's almost like I had to pinch myself. It's really like until you try it, you don't understand. I'm not. Look, if we were outside, I would not be so bold as to try it on camera, but definitely we got more range than I expected in this shot. In the studio.
Once again, signal to noise, right? You got a really clean channel, and 2 milliwatts is enough as long as it's not dipping below that noise threshold. And you may recall the kind of famous video where we walk test this thing outside behind the machine shop and got at least 75 yards with it.
Yeah.
So it's very usable, and I encourage everyone to experiment with it. If you've got our digital systems now, experiment with this. Find a clean channel and walk test it for yourself. Like Peter said, don't try it on camera, for a critical shoot, but get familiar with it and know what it will do for you. Yeah,
I was blown away. Yeah, truly.
So here's the units right now available, although the DSSM is a little premature since it hasn't been shipped yet. But there's more on the way. We're going to have the DBSM family fairly soon. And other models as well. So this is starting to be fleshed out, but since the emphasis was on getting your camera hops and your digital IFBs out of that, 470 to 608 range. You can start with that right there, because the M2RA, we already have that available, legal to sell in the B1C1 band, the DCHT and the DCHR, as well as these other receivers. So quite a bit of stuff.
Yeah, huge.
That's kind of the outline of it. And do you want to check for questions, or do you have any other things to relate about this, Peter?
I'm good. I would definitely if anybody has questions, by all means, now's the time to ask. I am really grateful that you were able to come on and clear that up, and I'm happy to see that you have so many models available now. Obviously, more to come in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I do think we need to be able to take advantage of all the spectrum that's out there. So
yes,
that's
more and more important. We've lost so much, so the goal is to get some tools out there that help with that help people with the flexibility that they're going to need given the job and what they're up against.
Yeah, and so this is a total of 12 megahertz that's gifted to us, 10 and 2. Yeah,
12 meg, 2 plus 10 above 600 that are legally accessible if the tools can be certified for it. And I know people are using stuff that's not technically legal. And to cover what those things are, it's got to be under 20 milliwatts. And even if you've got a unit that's got 50 milliwatts, a 50 milliwatt setting, you could put a 6 dB attenuator on it and knock it down. That's one way to. It's not technically strictly legal, but what you're doing is you're conforming to the rules.
Right.
The other thing is that you can't use a device that can tune beyond those notches, right? So if you've got something that's, let's say, block 25 and covers that whole band, it's not technically legal to use that. But, I think there's people that are savvy enough to know to keep their power low and to never use any frequency outside of that duplex gap or the guard band. And so who's going to know, right? So just be careful with that and understand what the rules are. But these devices now are certified by the FCC for use in those bands because they conform to those rules.
Right. And I think a lot of what we hope to achieve is to make sure people understand what the legal use of the spectrum is.
Yes, always very important.
If you have a legacy, I don't know legally if I'm allowed to say this, but if you have a legacy transmitter, I personally would rather you transmit on a frequency that's in one of these 12 megahertz chunks than step on a cell carrier and then sort of open up a possibility of getting written up, and that's a bad mark for all of us in the industry. So
it is. You don't want them coming looking for you. You don't want to be stepping on something else just because it's clean at the moment. If it's not a legal frequency, there could be something tuned there, and you may be stepping on something sensitive, and they may come looking for you.
I'll address that just because it came up recently with a frequency coordinator that I was talking to, and they wanted to make the point to our customers that just because that spectrum might be cleared now, if they go to a coordinated event, it doesn't mean that frequency coordinator hasn't filed an STA for that spectrum. Which is a whole other reason to stick to the bands set aside specifically for these white space and radio mic devices. In fact, it's just radio mic. I think it's just radio mic. That's not even there's the white space devices are sort of not written in the rules as far as I know.
Yeah, well, they're considered unlicensed, and they would be under, in terms of priority, any licensed user, which is good to know that you would have priority over them. But that it becomes a little bit down in the noise in terms of how is enforcement going to solve that? We have to do as you say, which is always conform to the rules as much as possible. We're considered a licensed user,
right,
and we're eligible for licenses. And it's professional use. It's not, someone's Wi-Fi because they have a farm, and that's important too, but we're professional users generating content.
Yes. And commercial interests like cell carriers do protect their spectrum.
Yes, they do.
With enforcement, just throwing that out there too.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a couple of questions.
Great.
Carlos asks, A1B1 transmitters have a tuning range spanning 138 megahertz, and non-North American B1C1 transmitters can span 154 megahertz. Why wasn't I think you've addressed this, Karl, why wasn't the North American B1C1 transmitters made to max out at 663 and extend down below 537 to give us more spectrum?
Well, there's technical limitations with doing that, but we'd already established the A1B1 and B1C1 bands. So all I can say is, that doesn't mean forever, but that's just based on the platforms that we have available now.
And reading Carlos's question out loud, I think I understand he's like, why not just shift down the tuning range? And I can see that causing as much confusion as convenience.
Yeah, an example of that would be the Block 19 470 overlap, which has caused us nothing but headaches for many years. Yeah. Sure, could it technically be done? Yes, but again, then someone might say, well, but my receiver doesn't go there. I've got a B1C1 receiver that gives me access up to the C1 band. So why doesn't that go down to 470? It's like because it doesn't. Again, not that it won't forever, but we wanted to develop on the platform that we have established, which is these bands, these A1B1 and B1C1 bands.
Yes, but fair question, Carlos. I get it. Yeah. John Dundas asks, in the coming years, wireless mic spectrum is going to be a massive challenge with FIFA World Cup and Olympics. These are massive high-demand events, so anything that helps spread the load on the restricted North American bands will be welcome.
Wonderful. So, that's certainly the idea. Exactly what we're doing it for.
Yes. Well, all right. Carlos, seems like a limitation due to keep compatibility with old hexadecimal gear. Yeah, I suppose that's true. The example that you gave, Karl, of 470-19 overlap, it breaks the pattern, and it has caused confusion. I can see future products. I'm not speaking for you, but I can see future products kind of starting from a cleaner slate.
Two things. Certainly, the future is always potentially different, and we're learning as we go, as everyone is, and what the users expect and want. But we've done we've worked really hard to always be backwards compatible. So these units now, like a DCR822 or a DSR4, are backwards compatible with units in the hybrid range, which do have specific pilot tones per frequency. So that is something to be careful about. And you're right. So let's imagine a day when that's gone, and because those issues don't exist in the digital realm. So you have a point. But as you said, Peter, that backwards compatibility and keeping older gear running and giving people a chance to upgrade, let's say, one unit at a time without having to break everything and toss it. That's always been important to us.
No, I mean, I remember the days of pogo pins to load in custom frequencies in the hex tables to get the offsets that I needed. So, to think about that world and how far we've come, I'm very happy, very grateful for that. Charlie Mead, the duplex gap is the only thing I use reliably outside in downtown LA. That's
excellent.
That's
great tip.
Excellent and good to know. Yeah. And
good.
I think, let's be clear in terms of like what might go away in the future. The duplex gap is there, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really there to protect the commercial interests of the cell carriers, to protect their downlink and uplink. So that feels to me like it's protected. It's not just, set aside for us. It's really to protect the base station and the hand units for the cells.
Yeah, they want to make sure that as the tails of their system, that there's an absolute gap and no overlap whatsoever. Hey, it's band planning, right? And they get it. But the fact that it's legally allowing wireless mics in there is because of the negotiations that we were all involved with. I went to some of those meetings at the FCC in Washington in 2014. It goes back that far that, look, you're taking away a bunch of spectrum. We want some pieces of it back, or we want guarantees and so on. And it was written in then. So it's just taken a while for us to have the tools to access it. But yeah, it's it's a good thing that there's that much. And they probably could have got away with less, but it's a good thing they left that much.
No, it's great, and we're grateful for the manufacturer's efforts to really lobby how I saw it to the FCC.
Yeah,
I mean,
we wanted more. We asked for a lot more, and we got a few important concessions, and this is one of them.
Now I was at one of those sessions. I remember going with Howard Kaufman. Just shout out to
Yes, he went
Howard.
to one of those. That's right.
And I don't know if you were there, but can you confirm or deny? I swear on the dais on the FCC's table were 700 megahertz wireless mics that they were using.
I wasn't there for that one. I don't remember any wireless mics being used at any of the sessions I was attending. But that's funny. It doesn't surprise me.
Which goes to show like how complicated these rules really are, I think. But
it's taken everyone a long time to absorb this.
Yes.
And, it still happens occasionally that people say, I'm trying to get my mic worked last week and then this week it doesn't work. And you're like, what frequency or what block are you on? I'm on block 24. Well, something turned on as was inevitable because that band was sold. And
yes.
So the fact that it worked up till last week is that you got really lucky and you've been breaking the law, since
fair.
2018,
And listen, it happens, in 470 to 608, TV stations that had construction permits, and are ready to fire up. And now we've gotten calls where a bunch of radio mics are knocked off the air. So it's never, change is constant, I think is the truism.
It really does. In fact, like I use the IAS software if I'm trying to analyze like what might be a good block or range for a particular location based on the FCC database. And every time I fire up that software and look at the TV wizard, it's telling me that there's an update to the database.
Yeah.
Every time.
Oh, yeah.
So it's always changing, even if it's just a little bit. And that's the wide tuning ranges. I mean, that was the biggest industry response to all that was let's make stuff that tunes over a much wider range. The downside being all the overlap between your systems, as we were talking before.
Correct. And that's where band planning and even I'm a huge advocate of filtering. External filters comes into play. Yeah, yep. where we see where I'm sort of opening up the conversation a little bit more generally, just to see if anybody wants to jump in the comments before we close. But where we see the biggest issues tend to be on those frequencies closest to two-way radios. So not just the two-way radios on a set, but even educating people about T-band in various cities and T-band usage. So here in New York, 14, 15, 16, 470 to 488, is T-band. And so a lot of our customers in New York are only aware of it once we kind of point it out to them.
And I would imagine it's a commonplace with the kind of scenario you described where, hey, it worked yesterday, it worked this morning, it worked 5 minutes ago.
Well, that's the frustrating thing with the itinerant kind of two-way radio use is you scan, and if you don't catch the transmission while you're scanning, it looks clean. And so that's a particular danger. And then in those cities where T-band is not a thing, but you are using block 470, of course, the ADs look for where the sound department puts their radio mic receive antennas because they know that's out of shot. They stand directly under the antenna and cue all the action into your system.
Yep.
So it's
a problem.
Yeah. So again, that with wideband comes wide responsibility.
On that topic, you mentioned filtering, and that's certainly key to success. Also, we add in attenuation as being a critical tool. It's probably the most broken record topic that I cover in any RF seminar, and we'll be doing one tomorrow for the local 695 for LA. But RF gain structure, having that done right is really important because if there's any stage with too much gain, it's much more vulnerable to things like two-way radios and other issues. Too much gain in RF is bad news. So, in fact, some amount of loss up to 6 dB is always preferable to any gain if you can avoid it.
Yes, and that's where the less is more really comes into play with digital modulations.
Yes. Yep.
Shout out to Jim Keeney, who says, got to waterfall scan that T-band. So, yes, completely agree.
There you go. Yeah. Good idea.
Well, Karl, thank you so much. Anything that you want to add before we sign off?
No, just, thank you, Peter, and the Gotham team. I'm glad we're able to cover this topic. I think it's important. I want to make sure people are aware of, what this spectrum represents and maybe what some of the tools are that could get you in there legally. And, as always, I'm reachable. Send me your questions. And of course, Peter and his team, they're great in terms of support as well. So we're here to help.
And we will see Lectrosonics at next at AES NAB coming up next month here in New York. Yes,
we'll be there. We'll have the latest stuff. If you have any questions or want a little walkthrough with Wireless Designer, or want to see these B1C1 tools, whatever you're into, we're there. We're happy to show you.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, Karl. Thanks to the team. Thanks, Nate. Thanks, Jared. Thank you for watching. As always, gothamsound.tv is where you'll find more videos. Info@gothamsound.com for ideas. And we'll see you real soon. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, everyone.